tonight's AEW presents Double or Nothing from Daily's Place, a near sold out Daily's Place. Just to give you an indication of, this is how we record these videos, but I was just checking on social media about 10-15 minutes ago. There was a post by Dave Meltzer who said that as of 20 minutes ago from the time recording, that there was something like 352 tickets left available for tonight's show. So assuming that they sell 300 tickets, 352 to be specific, tickets between now and showtime, which is of course 8 p.m. Eastern time in the United States, it looks like we're going to have a near capacity attendance in Daily's Place for tonight's Double or Nothing event, which is very exciting. I think, to be honest, that's the thing I'm excited about the most. I'm excited obviously for lots of the matches, including this one we're going to talk about, the Stadium Stampede, but I think the thing I'm excited about the most for tonight is the fans, having the fans back. Now, Friday was a bit of a teaser, wasn't it? A bit of a just to wet the taste buds, if you will, about what to expect in terms of crowd reaction, in terms of crowd response for Double or Nothing, and that was great. And to be honest, Friday night's Dynamite show by AEW wasn't exactly the most amazing edition of Dynamite we've ever seen. If anything, almost slightly the opposite. It wasn't the best Dynamite we've ever seen, but it didn't matter. It did not matter one bit, because just having the fans there, having the reaction, having them sing along to Judas when the Inner Circle came out, having them react when the Pinnacle made their big attack on a Jericho, long-time Jericho friend at the end of that segment. It made it. It was just such a great feeling, and it's going to be even better tonight for Double or Nothing. So I'm very excited, very, very excited for that. But as I mentioned, what we're going to talk about in this video is the Stadium Stampede. It's the Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle. Of course, if the Inner Circle lose, the Inner Circle must disband forever. Of course, this is the second ever Stadium Stampede. The first Stadium Stampede event or match took place at last year's Double or Nothing event. It's going to take place in the same place as it did last year, in TIAA Bank Arena, or Stadium rather, which backs onto Daily's Place. It's the home of the Jacksonville Jaguars, owned of course by the Khan family. Now, last year's Stadium Stampede event is going to be slightly different to this year's. Now, last year's Stadium Stampede event, of course, there was nobody in the stadium apart from the competitors themselves. It was between the Inner Circle and the Elite and Matt Hardy last year, and obviously it was filmed ahead of time. It was cinematic to a point, and also it was heavily reliant on comedy. It was very, very comedic, and it saw, of course, the Inner Circle lose to the Elite. In that case, it had Sammy Guevara take the pinfall from Kenny Omega after hitting a one-winged angel out of the stands through some apparatus, shall we say. Now, from what we've heard, it's going to be slightly different, the Stadium Stampede this year. Now, what I mean by different is, when we first started hearing that we were going to get the Stadium Stampede between the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle, I was slightly confused how it would work, in the sense that we have got this big crowd there tonight for Double or Nothing, and it still to the point. I still kind of trying to figure out how this is going to work, but we've got this big crowd there for Double or Nothing, nearly a sold out crowd, and I wondered at the time, we've been waiting for so long to have fans return, and then they do return, and they've got to watch big screens again, and it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? How does that work? How is that going to work? Are they really going to sit there and just watch the big screen while this match goes ahead? Is it going to be pre-recorded like it was last time? Are they going to have nearly 5,000 people just sitting there watching a screen of a pre-recorded match that's probably going to last 20 to 25 minutes? Is that really the best use of time? Is that the best use of the event? All that kind of stuff. I wasn't sure about that. And on top of that, this is a very, very bitter feud, isn't it? We've had blood and guts, and we've had lots of violence. We've had an injury to Chris Jericho. We've had MJF throwing Jericho off the blood and guts cage, all that kind of stuff. Is it really going to be settled in a Stadium Stampede match that's pre-recorded and largely based on comedy? I didn't really get all of that, but it has been reported that it's not exactly going to go that way, because by all accounts, this year's Stadium Stampede event is going to be different than last year's. It's not going to be pre-recorded as far as I'm aware. There might be pre-recorded elements of it, but the majority of it is going to be live. I don't know if they're going to try and maybe move the crowd across. I don't know how possible that is in terms of social distancing. I know people will talk about vaccines and mask wearings and stuff like that, but how do you move 5,000 people over en masse to the stadium? I don't know how they would do that, so I can't imagine the people would be in the stadium unless they, at some point in the show, start to move people over. I don't know how that would work. Obviously, logistically, shooting that live of having, 10, so if they pair off, let's say, if they pair off into twos, you're going to have 5 separate locations all recording at once. That's very difficult. I mean, they've got the cameraman to do it, and camera females, camera women, camera people, equality. They've got the camera people to do it, but from a logistical point of view, from a mapping things out, from a director, a producer, that becomes very difficult. That can turn into a cluster very quickly if they do it live. I mean, obviously, if it's to tape, you can shoot all these different things, put them together, and then edit them together. It becomes a bit easier. It's still difficult, but you can edit those things together. Live, you're going to have your spots really regimented out. You're going to have everything planned out to perfection. You're going to have to make sure everything works in that sense. So there are going to be different elements to it. I've also heard that it's going to be far more violent than it was last year, which is good, which it should be, frankly. I mean, you could look at this and say that they've kind of done things the wrong way round, in the sense that Blood and Guts, for me, if you take away the name, it's War Games. It's War Games, right? It's a War Games match. War Games, for me, should be the be-all and end-all of any feud. If you're having a War Games match, that should be the end of the feud. That's the way you finish a feud. That's the way you tie up a feud, whether it's between two groups, whether it's between two singles guys that happens to have groups with them, whether it's whatever. That's how you finish up a feud. It's like in Hell in the Cell. It's like my problem with the Hell in the Cell pay-per-view is that, for me, Hell in the Cell should be the end. You shouldn't carry on a feud afterwards, and it should be worth the feud. Now, the Pinnacle versus the Inner Circle, I felt that probably was worth the Blood and Guts, considering the history that MJF and Chris Jericho have. MJF beating Jericho to become a part of the Inner Circle, trying to rip the Inner Circle apart, all that kind of stuff. The Sammy Guevara elements of it as well. I thought Blood and Guts worked for that concept. I thought that for the storyline purposes that worked. But I don't understand how you can have a Blood and Guts match, the Pinnacle win that match, it's violent, it's bloody, pretty much everyone in that match gets colour, MJF throws Chris Jericho off the roof, all that kind of stuff, and now they're going to another match. Because for me, the Stadium Stampede, it's not as violent as Blood and Guts. So it does feel like it's a step down, because you have to think of it this way. In pro wrestling, in terms of any form of storytelling, things have to escalate. They have to escalate and they have to get bigger. That's how it makes sense. You know, if you've got a violent feud, you'd start off in a singles match, then you'd go to, I don't know, a street fight, then you'd go to a Hell in the Cell match. You know what I mean? Things escalate and they get bigger and bigger. This feels like de-escalation. That this match can be violent, it's chaotic, but is chaos as violent as Blood and Guts? I don't think so. Now, they tried to make things seem more violent, make things seem bigger by adding, obviously, the stipulation onto this of that if the Inner Circle lose, they have to disband. That makes things makes things feel bigger. I suppose that's an escalation. But in terms of the violence, maybe things are slightly de-escalated. So that's why I think the reports have come out to say, look, this is going to be really, really violent. So I think they're going to try, they're going to try to make this feel more violent than Blood and Guts. How they do that, how they achieve that, I don't know. If they've got some big spots, some real big moments planned in this, I think they might go for that. We'll have to wait and see what those moments are. But I've heard that it is going to be violent, it is going to be bloody, it is going to be brutal. It is going to be brutal, and it is going to be live. However that works, I don't know. Now, for me, in terms of a prediction, I think the Pinnacle win. I think if you look at the Inner Circle, what is there really left for them to do? The Inner Circle have been a part of AEW since the very first episode of Dynamite. That very first episode of Dynamite on TNT in October 2019 closed with the formation of the Inner Circle. We had Jake Hager making his debut. You had Sammy Guevara coming out. You had Chris Jericho teaming with Santana and Ortiz. And since then, they have been a faction. They have been heels. They have supported Chris Jericho while he was Le Champion of AEW. They've also turned into baby faces during this feud with the Pinnacle. But you look at them now, and every good faction, they have a shelf life. They do. Even the greatest faction of all time. Eric Bischoff was on AEW Dynamite this past Friday, and it's around this time, isn't it, 25 years ago or something like that, that the New World Order, the NWO, were formed in WCW, arguably one of the greatest factions, if not the greatest faction of all time. They've got a shelf life. They had a shelf life at the time, because after a while people got tired of them. Maybe because things change, but everything has a shelf life. That's not to say the Inner Circle can't come together once again in the future, but I think they've had their time. I think they all need to go off into separate things. I think Santana and Ortiz, I want to see them more involved in the tag team title picture. I don't think they have, and I think that's what's next for them to achieve, because they're such a great tag team, and they're so compelling. I think Santana on the mic, and Ortiz for that matter, are very, very good on the microphone, and I want to see more of that. I think Sammy Guevara, it's his growth so far in AEW has been fantastic to see. I mean, he touched on it this past week, didn't he? When he said, look, when I came into AEW, I was wearing a panda on my head. Now I'm part of one of the biggest factions, certainly in AEW history. And the guy has developed, and he is continuing to develop. And I think you listen to the crowd reaction for Sammy Guevara this past week. The guy is a huge babyface in the making, isn't he? He is a huge babyface in the making. And I think now it's time for Sammy Guevara to maybe transition into a TNT Championship picture, or maybe do things that are more closely associated with being a singles wrestler. Jake Hager, he would be one that you would sort of go, well, I don't know what he does. I don't know what Jake Hager does without the Inner Circle. I suppose you could look at it in the sense that just because the Inner Circle split up doesn't necessarily mean Hager can't stay with Jericho. People might look at that as a bit of a contradiction to the rules, though, so I don't know how that would go. It's interesting, that one, because I really look at Jake Hager and I go, he suits the Inner Circle great. He serves as a heater for Chris Jericho great. What does he do without that? Take away Chris Jericho, take away the Inner Circle, what does Jake Hager do? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one. I really don't know what he does. And as far as Jericho, look, I think Chris Jericho can do whatever Chris Jericho wants to do. It's plainly obvious Jericho doesn't need the Inner Circle. He doesn't need a faction, and he's spoken about this throughout his whole career, that he didn't really want to be part of a faction. He never felt that he needed one. If anything, the unique thing with him having a faction in AEW is just that he's had a faction, because he's never really been part of one in the past, and that's been a unique kind of perspective for him. But he doesn't need one. He's Chris Jericho. He can do whatever he wants with whomever he wants. I know there's lots of people discussing, well, are the Inner Circle going to break up, and then is Jericho going to go on tour with Fozzy? I know they've announced new tour dates. As far as I'm aware, he's not going to be taking any time off. He works a very limited schedule anyway, in the sense that he has to show up for Dynamite on Wednesdays. That's it. I expect that to stay the same in the future. Obviously, he's very committed to AEW. He's very committed to Tony Khan. I don't think any of his tour dates clash with any Dynamite tapings on a Wednesday or anything like that. So I don't expect Jericho to go anywhere anytime soon. And frankly, if he wants to, I don't know if it necessarily really damages Dynamite if Jericho went away for, say, a month. Is he indispensable to that show? Initially, yes. And I think, if anything, it's a credit and a testament to what Jericho's helped build in AEW, that initially, if you'd have said, well, if Jericho's not on the show, there's not a huge amount of draws to watch that show. I don't know if that's the case now. I don't know if people tune in to see what Jericho's doing, and Jericho obviously adds a huge amount of credibility to the show, to the company, and to the product, but he's not as indispensable now as he once was. If Jericho wants to take a month off to tour, he can. I don't think he will, though. I think he's going to stay around in the future. So I think it makes the most sense for the Inner Circle to break up, because I don't see what's left for them to do, frankly, in AEW. As far as the Pinnacle, I mean, obviously they could do a situation where the Inner Circle win this one and they go to a tiebreaker, if you will. They go to a third and final match. Where that would be, I don't know. Can they stretch it out to All Out? I don't know. I don't know if the story has legs at that point. I don't know. For me, the Pinnacle, look, they won their first big match as a faction. They needed to. That was the right outcome. I think it's the same here. I think the right outcome is continuing to build them as a dominant faction, and that's to have them win. And I think that makes the most sense. As far as the angle this past week on Dynamite, where they attacked Dean Malenko, I thought that was well done. Obviously, it was a setup, and they had the pile driver spot. Maybe they do something similar at the Stadium Stampede tonight. I think just because the Inner Circle break up doesn't necessarily mean it might not be the last match that MJF has with Jericho. I could see that maybe going until All Out or something like that, because that would make things kind of seem full circle for this whole feud, because you've got to remember, MJF got into the Inner Circle because of him defeating Chris Jericho at Full Gear last November. So who's to say that they don't split up the Inner Circle, and then you have Jericho versus MJF one more time at All Out, potentially do something even crazier than this. Again, you have to think about escalation. Where does the escalation go in that one? So I don't necessarily know what that could be like or what that could look like. So that's certainly interesting. I mean, as well, again, if you really wanted to do something, and maybe this is too, Vince Russo-ish, or this is too much of a swerve or whatever, who's to say that we don't see maybe one of the members of the Inner Circle join the Pinnacle or something like that? I've been saying for a while, and I said this back to Blood and Guts, when they had the match on the Blood and Guts edition of Dynamite, that who was the one to say that they surrendered in that match? It was Sammy Guevara. Sammy Guevara is the one to say surrender. And I mentioned at the time that they could do something to the effect of Chris Jericho turning on Sammy Guevara, how dare you surrender for me? How dare you surrender for me, and how dare you do something like that? And Jericho turns on Guevara, makes Guevara into a big babyface, and then Jericho feuds with Guevara going forward. And that could be the feud heading into All Out. I could see something like that because, like I said, Sammy Guevara does have this huge amount of potential as a babyface. He does have this huge amount of potential as a big star in AEW going forward. So who's to say that Jericho doesn't turn on Guevara, and that's how they lose this match, and then Jericho and Guevara do their own thing? Or on the flip side, Guevara could turn on Jericho. Right? The student turns on the teacher. You have to remember the Sammy Guevara element to all of this. Sammy Guevara told Chris Jericho over and over again, you can't trust MJF. I'm telling you, you can't trust him. He's trying to turn us against us. He's trying to turn me against you. And Jericho wouldn't have it. And MJF and Wardlow came into the faction. And eventually MJF tried to kick Chris Jericho out of the faction. And Sammy Guevara came back, and now the Inner Circle are back together. But maybe it could be a case of the Pinnacle defeat the Inner Circle tonight, and they've got to split up. And then Sammy Guevara attacks Chris Jericho and say, I told you this was happening. This is all because of you. This is all your fault. If you'd have just listened to me, the Inner Circle would be together right now. We wouldn't have this massive problem. This is on you. Maybe Sammy Guevara goes, you're too old. You're too slow. You can't do it anymore. It's about the new guys. It's about the new crop. It's about the new generation of talent. It's not about Chris Jericho anymore. Who's Chris Jericho? This isn't 1999. This isn't 2000. This is 2021. It's the time of Sammy Guevara. It's the time of All Elite Wrestling. No more Chris Jericho. See you later. No more Inner Circle. Who's to say they don't do something like that? Or again, flip it on the other side, is you could see the Inner Circle lose, and then they do the big hug, and that's when Jericho attacks Sammy Guevara. There's lots of different outcomes here. And frankly, I know some people wouldn't necessarily agree with this, but I think this is probably going to be the main event of the show. The Stadium Stampede was the main event last year. We had an AEW World Championship match last year, which was Jon Moxley versus Brody Lee. That didn't main event the show. The main event of last year's Double or Nothing pay-per-view was the Stadium Stampede. Now, I don't know if that's because of the cinematic nature of it. I don't know. I don't know if... there was lots of reports coming out this time last year, on the day of the show, the night before the show, that it was brilliant. The Stadium Stampede that they'd recorded was fantastic. I think even Chris Jericho tweeted something out to the effect of, it's the best thing I've ever done, or it's one of the most proudest things I've ever done during my however many years in the world of professional wrestling, 30 years or something like that. He said something to that effect. I recall him saying that. So, I mean, who's to say? Who's to say that this doesn't main event again? And if it does main event again, I think the right outcome is the Pinnacle winning. On top of that, I think that you can close the show in many ways, but one of the best ways, I think, of closing the show could have the Inner Circle losing, and the crowd that I don't know how it's going to work, if they're going to be in the stadium or not, but the crowd inside Daly's place or wherever, they're chanting, they're clapping, because it's the end of a moment. It's the end of a bit of an era in All Elite Wrestling. Again, since day one of AEW Dynamite, we've had the Inner Circle as a faction, and then we realized, it's over. The Inner Circle are no longer going to be together again. They're banished, they're banned, they have to split up for good. They do a bit of a Madison Square Garden, the click curtain call, where they hug and they pose for the crowd, and individually, one by one, they leave. So whether it's Jake Hager leaves, Santana and Ortiz leaves in there, Sammy Guevara and Chris Jericho, they hug it out, they pose, and then Jericho, bang, Judas effect, just lays out Sammy Guevara, or vice versa. Personally, I would probably prefer if Jericho laid out Sammy Guevara. He works far better as a heel, and if anything, him being a babyface in AEW at this point does feel a little bit unnatural. And then maybe you could transition into Jericho versus Sammy Guevara, and then again, Jericho says, how dare you surrender for me? How dare you? You were the one. You caused this. Maybe Sammy Guevara takes the pin. Maybe if Guevara takes the pin at Double or Nothing, Jericho not only blames him for losing Blood and Guts and having his arm injured, but he also blames him for losing a Double or Nothing. He blames him for letting MJF infiltrate the group, and he departed. He quit before. He's starting to realize maybe Sammy Guevara's a quitter, and I don't associate myself with quitters. I never needed the Inner Circle. I used the Inner Circle, and now that we're gone, I'm moving on to something else, because I am Le Champion. I am the ratings god. I'm the reason AEW's here. It's all because of me. you could see something like that. I think that's not out of the realm of possibility. So I think this will be the main event, even though we've got a World Championship match on the show, and I think the Pinnacle win and the Inner Circle breakup, but I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if either Jericho turns on Guevara or Guevara turns on Jericho. That's my sort of wild card prediction for tonight. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the Stadium Stampede match, the Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.